you should be good to go.
Okay, good evening, everyone. So tonight I'll be presenting on rhesus negative pregnancies and rhesus immunization, isoimmunization. I hope everyone can hear clearly. And for this discussion, this presentation will be divided into 4 sections. And the 4 sections include introduction to the topic. We're going to speak about the pathophysiology and prevention, as well as management of the sensitized patient. So these are the learning objectives by the end of this tutorial that I would like everyone to have accomplish. So by the end of this tutorial, you should be able to define isoimmunization, explain the pathophysiology of isoimmunization, list the causes of fetal maternal hemorrhage, discuss testing for sensitization, discuss prevention of sensitization, and discuss the management of the sensitized patient. So as an to introduce everyone to the topic, we'll first start with a definition. So blood groups are classification of blood based on the presence and absence of antibodies and inherited antigens on the surface of the red blood cells. There are 2 main classifications that are used, which is the ABU classification and the Rhesus classification. However, there are lesser known blood groups such as Cal, Duff, and Kidd, which aren't typically used. However, for this presentation, we'll be focusing on the Rhesus classification. So Rhesus antigens are located on non-glycosylated transmembrane proteins on the red blood cells membrane. There are more than 45 serologically defined antigens within the Rhesus system, the most common being big D, big C, small c, big E, and small e. Rhesus negative individuals are those who red blood cells do not express the D antigen. And I'm sure everyone may have noticed on the slide that there is no small d, and that is because there isn't a small d antigen. Small d is used to denote the absence of the D antigen. And then Rhesus antibodies arise in the setting of exposure to blood from another individual. So now we're going to discuss what is isoimmunization. So isoimmunization, also called alloimmunization, is defined as the process whereby immune antibodies are produced in one individual in response to the injection of antigens from another individual. And this commonly occurs via pregnancy or in blood transfusion in terms of transfusing a Rhesus negative individual with Rhesus positive blood. However, in this case, we're going to be speaking purely in the context of via pregnancy. This is a small diagram that summarizes how isoimmunization occurs. However, later on in the presentation, when we're talking about the pathophysiology, this would be explained better. So in terms of background, here we have some epidemiology that was taken from the Blueprint series textbook of obstetrics and gynecology. And this shows the prevalence of Rhesus negativity by race and ethnicity. And as you can see, that Caucasians have the highest percentage of Rhesus negative persons. And this, which is 15%, and this also cooperates with the NICE guidelines, who gave the percentage in the UK as 16% of the Caucasian population. And then we have here the African American and African population with 8% and 4% respectively. And this is also similar to the values in Barbados of 4 to 6% prevalence, and this is taken from the a research done in Barbados with anti-D prophylaxis to give or not to give. And this paper can be seen on label word. So now we're going to speak about the pathophysiology. And to understand the steps in which or how isoimmunization occurs, I broke it down into these 4 steps. And the reason being is that I found that these 4 steps was easier to understand. So the first step would be you have your first exposure with a rhesus negative mother and a rhesus positive baby. You have sensitization, re-exposure, and your immune response. So in terms of sensitization, for sensitization to occur, there must be mixing of maternal and fetal blood called fetal-maternal hemorrhage. And also, as we spoke about before, where it could be sensitization from blood transfusions as well. And they say fetal-maternal hemorrhage occurs spontaneously with increasing frequency throughout pregnancy. However, there are events that can occur during pregnancy, which will increase your risk of fetal-maternal hemorrhage. And the frequency at which fetal-maternal hemorrhage occurs spontaneously is 3% in the first trimester, 12% in the second trimester, and 46% in the third trimester, with your highest risk being at delivery, where it's more than 50%. The rhesus negative mother mounts an immune response to the fetal D antigen, forming D antibodies. And then you have the first response is an IgM mediated response. And since the IgM is the largest antibody, the IgM molecule cannot pass across the placenta. And this is important in terms of where for isoimmunization, the fetus is not affected for the first pregnancy where you have this sensitization going on. And this is because of, in your first instance, the first immune response is with the IgM molecules, which are too large to pass, to cross the placenta. There's also the fact that for the first exposure, it takes up to about 6 months for the body to mount an immune response, an adequate immune response. And here we have some causes of fetal maternal hemorrhage, which it can occur spontaneously, as we discussed before, and after delivery. It can also occur after miscarriages, abortion, invasive procedures, and these invasive procedures include cesarean section, instrumental deliveries, as well as your external cephalic version, and also after abdominal trauma. So then we're going to talk about the re-exposure, which is the third step in the pathophysiology pathway we outlined previously. And for re-exposure, we have, for subsequent pregnancies, the sensitized mother produces a rapid immune response, usually within days, to the re-exposure of the rhesus positive fetal blood. And in this case, the mother produces IgG anti-D antibodies, which can easily cross the placenta into fetal circulation. These antibodies coat the D positive fetal cells, which causes them to be destroyed by the spleen and thus cause a severe hemolytic anemia in the fetus. And here we have a diagram which explains what we just went through, where you have Here you have your first pregnancy, which is your sensitizing pregnancy. And you have the presence of the rhesus positive antigen on the baby's red blood cell. You have your fetal maternal hemorrhage going on here, where you have your rhesus positive red blood cell now in the mother's circulation. And this is sensed by the B cells, which forms your plasma cells, and you get your anti rhesus IgM antibodies as your more immediate response. And then you also have your formation of memory cells as your more long-term response. So then you have your second pregnancy, and during your second pregnancy, where you have your memory cell now interacting with the fetal positive blood cell, rhesus positive blood cell, and you have the formation of your IgG antibodies, which easily cross the placenta and enters fetal circulation, thus causing your hemolytic anemia. And this is another diagram that is a simplified version of the previous diagram, where you have formation of antibodies and the antibodies crossing the placenta. So now we have, how do you prevent isoimmunization? Well, one way of preventing isoimmunization would be if you can test the father's rhesus blood group prior to pregnancy, but you can't tell persons who to have children with. So this is how you get a rhesus positive baby with a rhesus negative mother, where you can see that you have your small d, which denotes the mother's the absence of rhesus D antigen on the mother's red blood cells, and then you have the father's. So if the father is rhesus negative, you don't have to worry about isoimmunization because 100% of their children would be rhesus negative. However, if the father is homozygous for the rhesus, heterozygous rhesus positive, you see that there's the presence of the D antigen. So therefore, 50% of there's a 50% chance that it will be a rhesus positive baby. And then if the father is homozygous for rhesus positive D, you'll have a 100% chance of rhesus positive babies. And then other methods of determining fetal inheritance will be your chorionic villus sampling, aminocentesis, as well as prefetal DNA. With the choriovilus sampling and the aminocentesis, there is a chance of causing fetal maternal hemorrhage and worsening of the worsening sensitization. Specifically for the aminocentesis, they always have to be mindful of ensuring that when the clinician who is performing this test does not pass through the placenta with the needle.
Just to correct you there on your pronunciation. It's called amniocentesis.
Oh, sorry. Amniocentesis. And then you have free fetal DNA testing, which is where they test the presence of fetal DNA in the mother's serum. And what I saw is that they say free fetal DNA can be found in maternal circulation from as early as 38 days gestation. And by term, it can comprise of 6% of the total circulating DNA pool. And Jeffman-Holtzman et al. Found that the free fetal DNA technique has a 97% accuracy. And this method is preferred as it does not have the risk of worsening fetal maternal hemorrhage. And now we're going to talk about the anti-D prophylaxis. anti-D prophylaxis can be given as prophylaxis after a sensitizing event or routine antenatal anti-D prophylaxis. However, anti-D prophylaxis cannot be given in a mother who has been proven to be already sensitized, as it only works in patients who have not had a prior sensitizing event.
Excellent point to remember.
Pardon?
I said that's an excellent point to remember. That prophylaxis is prevention. So if you already have a sensitized woman, there's no point in giving her anti-D prophylaxis. It's a common mistake that you will see your colleagues make. Carry on.
And so before giving anti-D prophylaxis, a test that can be done to ensure that the mother has not been prior sensitized is the indirect Combs test, which this diagram explains. And for indirect Combs, you have the recipient's serum is obtained containing the antibodies, and a sample which is added to the serum. So in this case, you have the mother's serum, and they have a donor sample of red blood cells which are Rhesus positive. So if you have antibody antigen complexes being formed, that means that there were already antibodies in the mother's serum. So that means the mother has already been sensitized prior. And a positive result will be showed by agglutination of the red blood cells. However, if you have a negative indirect Combs, it means that the mother has not been sensitized prior to this pregnancy, and she would be a candidate for anti-D prophylaxis. So for prophylaxis after a sensitizing event, a minimum dose of, there's supposed to be 250 international units is recommended for prophylaxis following a sensitizing event up to 10 weeks plus 6 days gestation. And for all events that at or after 20 weeks gestation, a minimum of 500 international units of anti-D should be given. And the test is determined, and your indirect test is determined, and the test is to determine the degree of fetal maternal hemorrhage.
I think that you have made a mistake here.
Yes. Right.
So you swap your 9s with your 0s, apparently.
Yeah.
So the minimum dose is 250 international units. And the sensitizing events that you're going to give 250 is up to 19 weeks and 6 days, if that makes more sense to you, right?
Yes.
So after 12 weeks and up to 19 weeks and 6 days, you give 250 as a minimum. And then after that, you give 500. Prior to 12 weeks, you assume that the quantity of fetal maternal hemorrhage would be inadequate to mount a sufficient immune response to sensitized women. Let me say that again. If they're under 12 weeks, they ain't got that much blood in them to begin with. So if there's a miscarriage, a spontaneous miscarriage, we're expecting that very little fetal red cells would reach the circulation because the fetus is just so small. And thus you wouldn't need any anti-D. From 12 weeks up to 19 and 6 days, 250 is what you give. Beyond that, it's 500. Of course, this is in places where you get those vials with those sort of quantities in them. Here in Barbados, we get 1,500 international units, vials only. Yeah. The reason for this scenario here is that probably we haven't got any testing for any test of quantification of fetal maternal hemorrhage, which is the Kleihauer, for example. So we kind of have to give a big dose as a blanket regardless. I'm thinking you want to explain this now, right?
That's correct.
Carry on.
So after a sensitizing event, they recommend that the Kleihara testing can be done at the degree of fetal maternal hemorrhage. And it can be done via this or by flow cytometry. And Kleihara testing can also be used after delivery in a woman who may have experienced large fetal maternal hemorrhage and may require additional anti-D immunoglobulins. And I will be explaining the Kleihara testing in this slide. So the principle of the Kleihara testing is based on the notion that fetal maternal hemorrhage is resistant.
Sorry, try to see
Maternal.
Kleihara Becky.
Yeah, Becky. So the test is based on the notion that fetal hemoglobin is resistant to acid, whereas you have adult hemoglobin that is very acid sensitive. So they smear the sample taken from the mother. They make a thin peripheral smear and expose this blood to an acid buffer. And the percentage of fetal hemoglobin is converted to fetal maternal hemorrhage in mils that you can see right here, where they said the percentage of fetal cells over 100 by 5,000 mils, and that would be equal to your volume of fetal maternal hemorrhage in mils. And they say 30 mils of fetal maternal hemorrhage require 1,500 international units of anti-D immunoglobulin.
Right, so note this well, the basis of the Kleihara test, as I think this is one of you guys' MCQ somewhere, or past MCQs at least. Might have showed up in your mid-clerkship, I don't know. Okay, carry on.
So the next slide, we're going to speak about how anti-D immunoglobulins act. And this is that, so what happens is that you have, when you give an anti-D immunoglobulin, it acts by binding to the Rhesus positive fetal red blood cells and clearing it from circulation. And like we said previously, it's only safe to use in patients who have not been previously sensitized. This is what they hypothesize as how it acts, but from reading, they say that they do not fully understand the mechanism of action. And to understand how the anti-D prophylaxis acts, if you remember what we spoke about in the pathophysiology with the formation of the mother's antibodies and mounting the immune response, you can see that what the anti-D does is that it clears the fetal antigens from circulation before the mother's immune system can act on it.
Excellent.
So then we're going to talk about routine antenatal anti-D prophylaxis. And this is denoted by RAADP. And this can be given routinely as 2 doses of 1,000 to 1,500 international units, or one, and this is done 1 dose at 28 weeks and the other at 34 weeks gestation. So a mother who has not been previously sensitized. Or it can be given as a single dose of 1,500 international units, either at 28 weeks or between 28 weeks and 30 weeks gestation.
So what's the basis behind giving routine antenatal anti-D? Did you say?
The basis behind it is that you're giving your anti-D prophylaxis around the third trimester, where you believe the highest degree of fetal maternal hemorrhage is going to occur. So you have your highest risk of a sensitizing event occurring at this time?
Not exactly. So you're kind of on the right track though, in that we have sensitizing events, the ones that you mentioned earlier, things like amniocentesis, things like antepartum hemorrhage, stillbirth, abdominal trauma. Those sort of things are sensitizing and they're overt events. However, there's going to be a complement of those who are sensitized without an overt event. So the basis behind routine prophylaxis is to get them to get them those pick up those people that would not have otherwise have gotten in response to a sensitizing event, right? In order to prevent the silent sensitizations. Understand? Because if you had an overt event, even if you've given routine prophylaxis, you're still going to give prophylaxis at that point, right? And do your tests of fetal maternal hemorrhage and top up to suit, right? So the routine one is given at particular points in the gestation, and you're trying to avoid sensitization in the absence of an overt sensitizing event, which can occur in a few women. That makes sense. Think you get that?
Yes.
Pretty clear? Okay, carry on then.
Yeah. So now we have the available preparations of anti-D. And this slide shows the preparations that are available, the doses they are available in, and the routes of admission of these doses. So if you have your DGAM, which is available in vials of 250, 500, 1500, and 2500 international units. And these are given only intramuscularly. Partibulin.
Are you sure? Sorry, do you know of the reason why you might allow particular formulations to be given intramuscular only and some to be given intramuscularly and IV?
No.
Yeah, and it has to do with the purity of the formulation, you see. Because if there's any chance of there being something other than pure anti-D immunoglobulin, you can't give that intravenously because you're risking anaphylactic and febrile reactions, right? So your Rofalac there, which is the one we do get, and your Winro probably are purified, right? So they've been probably irradiated, got rid of any white cell contaminants, etc. Because remember, anti-D is a blood product. It's obtained from sensitized donors, people that have been, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally sensitized. So they really purify that. They get these really pure derivatives that can be given IV without anaphylactic reactions. Whereas the ones that are not so purified, your DGAM, your partobulin, for example, you can only give those intramuscularly. Okay?
Okay. Right. And then, so as you can see that two of the formulations here can be given intramuscularly, and two can be given both intramuscularly or IV route. And they're available in either pre-filled syringes or in this case, available as a powder reconstitution.
So how would you then normally plan to give anti-D? Charlie, how would you normally give anti-D?
Muscularly.
Sorry, you said intramuscularly. Yes? That is correct. So in what cases would you give it intravenously?
You would give it intravenously in cases of large fetal maternal hemorrhages, specifically after delivery.
No, not really. So here the same general contraindications to IM injection apply. Can you think of any contraindications to intramuscular injection?
So, so I didn't hear the last point.
I said that the usual contraindications to intramuscular injection would still apply here. And I ask you if you know any contraindications, either absolute or relative, to giving an intramuscular injection to someone.
No, not sure right now. Yeah, I'm not sure right now of any
So
absolute contrary.
all your colleagues are muted or watching on YouTube. So we'll probably just say that the persons who have bleeding disorders, prone to bleed, low platelets, low clotting factors, hemophiliacs, etc., you don't really want to inject something into their muscle because you can get big muscular hematomas. And similarly, you kind of want to employ caution with persons with bloodborne viruses such as HIV and hepatitis. So these are the persons that you might prefer to give intravenously their prophylaxis rather than intramuscularly, right? Of course, the intramuscular route is usually preferred, deltoid in particular, because of that sustained sort of absorption. And you prefer the deltoid rather than the buttocks because a lot of the anti-D can be lost into the body fat if they have particularly fatty buttocks. So you usually prefer deltoid for that reason. All right.
Okay. Yeah. And here we have talk about postnatal prophylaxis. So after the birth of a rhesus positive baby, mother is given an anti-D-IG within 72 hours of birth if a large fetal maternal hemorrhage is suspected. And the size of the fetal maternal hemorrhage after delivery is quantified by performing a Killheller test using within 2 hours post-delivery. And now we move on to management.
And hold on just a second, though. You said that you give it within 72 hours if the baby is rhesus positive and you suspect a large fetal maternal hemorrhage.
Yeah.
I want to say that if the baby is rhesus positive, you're going to give it anyway, right? Because there's going to be some fetal maternal hemorrhage, but the Killheller is used to quantify the size so that you know if to give additional anti-D on top of the 500, which is standard, right? Of course, like I said, we do give 1500 because that's all we get locally, all right? Now, how are you going to find out the baby's blood group?
And so after, you find out the baby blood group by taking cord blood after delivery.
Okay, yeah, okay. Carry on.
So for this section in management, we're going to talk about the various ways you manage a rhesus negative mother who has been previously sensitized. So prior, when we were talking about prophylaxis, we talked mainly about how you manage a mother who has not been sensitized, and now we'll be discussing how you manage a mother who has been sensitized. And these are 3 ways which you monitor a mother who's been sensitized. So you have the middle cerebral artery Doppler, you have your amniocentesis, and your fetal blood sampling. So this diagram shows the middle cerebral artery Doppler. And here what they do is that they use the flow volume. So the middle cerebral Doppler is used to monitor fetal anemia. It determines the fetal anemia by the basis that blood velocity is elevated in fetal anemia due to decreased viscosity of the blood and an increase in cardiac output. This test is 85% accurate, and monitoring using the middle cerebral artery Doppler can begin as early as 18 weeks gestation and repeated every 1 to 2 weeks. However, the false positive rate in detection of fetal anemia is highest after 35 weeks gestation. So after 35 weeks, you tend to have a decrease in the accuracy of using fetal Doppler. And here is a graph where they plot their values. So they plot on the y-axis, you see the peak velocity versus on the x-axis where you have your gestational age. And you have 3 zones, A, B, and C. And in these zones denote whether it is moderate to severe anemia, mild anemia, or if the hematocrit is normal. And then you have your...
Okay, so I just want to just speak a bit more on that one. So yes, you're right to say that red blood cells impart some sort of viscosity, some sort of thickness to the blood so it doesn't flow as fast. And here, yes, we have our middle cerebral artery Doppler, part of the circle of Willis. So we've got fetal anemia. Of course, there's going to be more liquid elements than solid elements, so the blood's going to flow a lot faster. And remember, you do protect your brain more than other organs when you're, either anemic and lacking oxygen or oxygen for other reasons like in IUGR and so on. So you're going to have cerebral redistribution of that blood, and it's going to be flowing pretty fast because viscosity is low. So yes, you're measuring the peak systolic velocity, PSV, right? Of course, systolic velocity is going to be the fastest. There's peak systolic velocity in the middle cerebral artery Doppler. So PSV, MCA is what you're measuring. And you tend to think of it in terms of, as you go along the gestation, you've got here on this graph here, in the middle will be a median, all right? And then of course, you're going to have upper and lower quartiles. So if you think about multiples of the median, how many times the median at the gestation, or MOM, multiples of the median, you can plot the systolic velocity, and if you have more than 1.5 multiples of the median, or 1.5 times the median, 1.5 multiples of the median, you've got significant fetal anemia suggested. And that's an indication to do further testing to confirm fetal anemia and to potentially transfuse. So you tend to do at that point fetal blood sampling, and you can transfuse through the same needle that you've done the sampling from, right? So that's going to be ultrasound guided, needle through the abdomen, needle into the umbilical cord, withdraw some blood for testing, and that same needle in there can be used to transfuse a baby if you've confirmed anemia, if that makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
carry on.
And then you have your amniocentesis, and this is your gold standard for measuring fetal hemolysis. And it is an indirect indicator of the degree of fetal hemolysis by using the level of bilirubin in amniotic fluid. And here they use something called the delta OD or 50 value, and it is plotted either on the Lilly's curve or the Quinan's curve. The Quinan's curve is a modified version of the Lilly's curve, and it is more sensitive in comparison. And then the next slide, we're going to talk about the Quinan's curve. And this is where on the Quinan's curve, they plot, on the Quinan's curve, you have 3 regions where you have your rhesus negative unaffected, your indeterminate, and rhesus positive affected.
What's that 4th reason at the top?
Oh, and the 4th reason is intrauterine death risk.
Right. So we're measuring delta OD450, which is a change
in
of
the optical
optical
density.
density at 450 nanometers. So we're measuring basically how light is rotating through this thing, this amniotic fluid. And that is an indirect measure of bilirubin. Of course, we know bilirubin is a byproduct of red blood cell breakdown. So we assume that a fetus that has had hemolysis as a result of maternal alloimmunization would increase the bilirubin in the secretion into the amniotic fluid, and you can detect that using amniocentesis, and you can plot that on these curves. Now, if you remember your sensitizing events, amniocentesis is a sensitizing event. So with that in mind, you know, test to find out if the thing that you're trying to think is going on, right? Are you making it worse? Has kind of gone out of favor, which is why they're not using amniocentesis to diagnose fetal anemia as much anymore. They've gone more to non-invasive testing, which is your peak systolic velocity in the middle cerebral artery Doppler, like we mentioned. Yeah.
Right. And then your other test is the other chart is the Lily's chart. So in the Lily's chart, you have 3 zones. Zone 1 indicates a rhesus negative or mildly affected fetus, so that the pregnancy may continue until 38 weeks gestation. And the recommendation is that amniocentesis may be repeated every 3 to 4 weeks. Zone 2, the fetus is moderately affected, so that amniocentesis should be repeated every 1 to 2 weeks to see the trend, and delivery by 34 weeks gestation is usually indicated. And in zone 3, you have a severely affected intrauterine fetus, so that intrauterine transfusions are usually indicated, and delivery should be undertaken once fetal pulmonary maturity is assured. So in zone 1, you repeat amniocentesis 3 to 4 weeks. Zone 2, you repeat 1 to 2 weeks. And zone 3, you try to assure fetal maturity for delivery of the fetus. So next, what we have is an outline or an algorithm which summarizes the management of a rhesus negative mother. So in the first box, you see that you have a homozygous paternal Rhesus D genotype, or Rhesus D positive fetus by amniocentesis of free fetal DNA. And then, so if you go to the left, you see your first affected pregnancy. And when they say repeat titers monthly until 24 weeks gestation, the titers they're talking about is the indirect Coombs test. And if your titers remain low or below the critical value, which is below or equal to 16, you can deliver a term. However, if your titers remain above critical value, that is of 32 or above, at 24 weeks gestation, you start to do your serial MCA Dopplers. And that could be done every 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay. So I think what we need to say here is titers. What we're thinking about when we think about titers is how much antibody is present in the blood, I guess, in a test tube when you're testing the titers, right?
Yes.
So the more the antibody, the higher is the amount of dilution. You know, if you dilute and cut in half and dilute in half and dilute in half again, eventually you wouldn't have any antibody, and then at that point, sorry, you won't be able to detect the antibody so well, and at that point we call that the titer. So I always tell the students, think about it like this. if you put one drop of Kool-Aid, one speck of Kool-Aid into a test tube, you might get a little bit of pink tinge. Divide that in half and you dilute it again, the pink tinge disappears, right? If you got a whole heap of Kool-Aid in there, it's going to take a lot of that halving and diluting until you can barely see that pink tinge, all right? So the number of dilutions you need to do is your titer. So if you had to divide it in half, you're getting up to 16 parts, 1 in 16, that is a 1 in 16. And then here we're taking critical as 1 in 32, right? So it took 32 times halving in order to get rid of that pink color in the Kool-Aid, right? So there's a lot of antibody here to begin with. So that means that we've got to go on to more testing, because this is a baby that's really at risk of having fetal anemia from red cell destruction because his mom has so much antibody in the blood. Is that kind of clear? Is that clear, Charlie? You're the only one I can hear.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great.
Okay, so then if you have a previously affected pregnancy, there is no need for maternal titers. At 18 weeks gestation, you will start your further serial testing. Because now you have a mother that was previously affected, so you know that her titers will be positive, and you start your testing. So then further down, this slide is a continuation of the previous slide. So they have how you would go about with your testing. So the peak middle cerebral artery velocity is what is preferred, and if it is greater than 1.5 MOMs, you do cord synthesis to determine your fetal hematocrit. And if your hematocrit is less than 30, that is an indication for your intrauterine transfusions. And if it is above 30%, you repeat in 1 to 2 weeks. And then if your peak middle cerebral artery velocity is not greater than 1.5 MOMs, you begin antenatal testing at 32 weeks. And then you go on to continuing Dopplers once it remains negative till you read and you continue your Dopplers once those remain negative and induce delivery at 38 weeks. And then
so I think the take-home message, I guess to keep it simple for you as undergraduates, is if you've got high titers, you've got to do invasive testing at least every 2 weeks, or sorry, non-invasive testing, your MCA. You find anemia, you probably want to confirm it. Invasive tests, that's the fetal blood sampling we mentioned, and transfuse as necessary, right?
right.
Trying to do is find a fine line between delivering a very anemic preterm baby and delivering a baby who hasn't maybe as much compromise, but is mature enough to survive outside the womb. So the more preterm you are, I guess the more likely you are to transfuse and of course give corticosteroid. And once you think the baby is stable enough, you probably would err on delivery. If you can get to full term, clearly that's the safest.
Yes.
So you kind of don't want to wait until the baby is about to die from, severe fetal anemia. And of course, severe fetal anemia can lead to heart failure, can lead to retention of fluid in various organs, what we call hydrops fetalis. Fluid on the lungs, fluid in the chest, fluid the abdomen, etc. That's hydrops as a result of heart failure and accumulation of fluid. And that in itself is reversible with transfusion as well. So yes, what we're aiming to do is do our testing. Once we find a baby that is critical enough, we need to either deliver it or transfuse it so we can get some more time to then deliver. All right. And if we're delivering preterm, we need corticosteroid on board. Whereas before we used to do, as I said, amniocentesis and stuff to get lung maturity and delta OD 450, that's gone with favor because steroids work well to mature lungs. And non-invasive testing is very accurate, right? So no need to worsen the sensitization that way, if that's clear.
Yes, it is. And additionally, pediatric consultation will be necessary because it is anticipated that after delivery, this baby may need further management on the NICU, especially if intrauterine transfusions were needed. That baby would most likely need transfusions after delivery as well. And then we're going to talk about, you have the fetal complications of alloimmunization. You have your antepartum complications and your postpartum complications. Your antepartum complications would be your fetal anemia, your high output heart failure, the hydrops fetalis, and intrauterine death. And your postpartum complications will be neonatal anemia, connectors, sensorineural hearing loss, cerebral palsy, and developmental delays. These are my references. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Charlia. You're finishing just on time as well. That's brilliant. Now, chat is open for questions. Our original Google Hangout, you can type in there if you've got any questions for the presenter. And I'm thinking I'm going to need to use that chat as a way of proving attendance. Any questions, guys? Put them into the chat now. Boy, nobody's have any questions on this difficult topic. Looks like someone's writing. The person seems to be writing. Stephen Hernandez says, Charlia, can you example middle cerebral artery test again, please?
So this is the middle cerebral artery test, and what is done is you have they use it using the ultrasound Doppler. It's placed at, I believe, is 90 degrees to the mother, and the circle of Willis is visualized. And what they do is that they measure the velocity at which the blood is flowing through the middle cerebral artery. And the basis behind this is that the degree of, according to the degree of hemolysis, the viscosity of the blood is decreased because you have less products in the blood. So the blood is thinner, so it will rush through the veins faster. Through the arteries faster. So that is why they plot it on the graph using the multiples median, gestational age, to give a estimate of the degree of fetal anemia. And this test is actually comparable with the testing with amniocentesis done previously. Hope that answers your question, Stephen.
Excellent. We got a question from Shanice. She's saying that she was checking that she got it right, that less than, I guess she meant 20 weeks. We give 250 anti-D And after that, we give 500.
Is less than 20 weeks. It's 20, not 29. 20 weeks, you give your 250, and then more than 20 weeks gestation, you give 500.
And Jean-Cel has said, just to reiterate the pathophysiology one more time after. Just a summary of it will be fine. I guess she wants to know the,
Okay.
just to recap, how do you get sensitized in the first place, I think, Jean-Cel?
So I think for me, the easiest way to understand the pathophysiology was by the 4 steps that I talked about before, where you have your exposure, your sensitizing event, exposure, sensitization, then you have your re-exposure and immune response. So your exposure is your first pregnancy, your body mounts the immune response, but does not affect that pregnancy. You have your second pregnancy now, re-exposure, your body mounts the response in a quicker time using the IgG, which is smaller, that can pass the placenta, and that is what affects the fetus in the second pregnancy. A way I like to think about it is similarly to how vaccines work.
Excellent.
Makes
Next
sense.
question was from Katura Murray, which says, will the link be available online to watch again if needed? And the answer to that is yes. You can still watch it online. I kept it as an unlisted YouTube video, so it's not searchable in the public, but the link should still continue to work. Next question is from Sharice Marshall. She says, could you state the dose of postnatal anti-D prophylaxis again, please?
So for the postnatal anti-D prophylaxis, the dose is based on the Clearheart's test, and based on your degree of fetal maternal hemorrhage, you give the required amount of anti-D for that. However, as Dr. Best stated, that in Barbados is only the 1,500 international units doses available in Barbados, so that is what would automatically be given.
Well said. So yes, we do give standard 1,500 international units, and it's given within 72 hours of delivery. However, in places such as UK, they would probably give 500, do the Kleihauer test after that, just to see if there's any additional fetal maternal hemorrhage which they can quantify and give to suit. And it tends to be 4 milliliters that's covered by 125. Sorry, 4 milliliters of fetal maternal hemorrhage is covered by 125 international units. Okay, sorry, my mistake. 4 covers is covered by 500, I think, and then each additional would be 125. All right, so the next question is from Shalise, saying, just to make sure I wrote it correctly, the Mills laboratory Doppler has the highest false positive rates at what gestational age?
And that is above 35 weeks gestation.
All right, and John T, I don't know if that's Tillen, is asking, so are we offering better coverage in Barbados then? I guess that's based on the 1,500 international units. Possibly for many people, we're over-treating them. I would say that there is going to be a percentage of people that are undertreated because we have not tested fetal maternal hemorrhage. Can't remember the exact percentage, but I'm thinking it is somewhere less than 2% of people are not covered by that standard 1,500 dose. So we're over-treating some, but we're under-treating others. But hopefully that's a small amount. Oh, they're getting into questions now. Oh, last thing was thank you. All right, so we're 2 minutes over time. Thank you all for coming. Well done to you, Charlia. I will sign your books when I see you. Okay, so that's it for us. Take care all.
Okay, thank